Hello, and welcome back to the Bober Academy Football Podcast as we continue our Saturday recovery series with Dr. Nolan Clausen of Midwest Movement Elkhorn. I'm your host, Chris Bober, 8-year NFL veteran, 4 years with the Giants, 4 years with the Chiefs. I played and started at every position in the NFL. Now I'm the owner of the Bober Academy, where our mission is to train and develop superior linemen to dominate on the gridiron. And probably more pressing, I am the offensive line coach at Creighton Prep as we get into the latter part of our season. So a quick reminder before we get started, if you're watching this, please remember to subscribe to our podcast wherever you're listening to this. If you're watching this on YouTube, right down there is a subscribe button. If you subscribe to our channel, we'd really appreciate it. And our handle is at Bober Academy on all the social media channels. So do all the things they do out there with retweeting, liking, commenting, and all the stuff. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. So Dr. Nolan, thanks for joining us once again as we get towards the later part of our high school football season here.
Yeah.
And, one of the things we talked about, kind of what we're going to talk about today. And one of the things that I'm seeing out there is a lot of guys are coming up with shoulder injuries. And we see this at every position. No position is really immune to this. But I see guys wearing those big black braces. What are those called?
Soles,
yeah. They have those on, and I'm just seeing more and more of those guys, and they're pushing through it. But let's talk about kind of why we start to see shoulder injuries this time of season. What are your thoughts as you see more and more shoulder issues pop up?
We're getting to this point of fatigue, right? Some of our off-season training, all those stability, all the strength and stuff, we're starting to diminish just a little bit. And so some of the glue that holds our bodies together is starting to, weaken. We see a lot of AC joints because people are getting tackled, and driven into the ground. And maybe those tissues just aren't quite as strong. We're starting to get tired. Our lack of sleep is catching up to it, tissues, everything's just catching up with us. We're getting to the grind of the season. We've only got a few more weeks of the high school football season, so we got to push through it. And so it really is coming down to, we just got to start doing some of those little things, the little rehab, maybe get a little bit of strength training in, not a whole lot, but enough to keep our tissues and everything ready. So that's the biggest thing.
Yeah, and I know it's hard from the coaching perspective. You get to this time of year, and especially for high school kids, you know what I mean? Their perspective is a little different than guys like you and I who played college, and of course I played so long in the NFL. You just get this point of the season, you don't see the benefit of putting in that extra time in the weight room or doing your mobility or flexibility exercises, a little strengthening things. So again, a reminder, we'll talk about some of those here today. But just a reminder out there that I tell my guys that the first day of practice this is the best you're going to feel all year, right? You're going to play hurt throughout the season. And there's so many little things that you can do to, kind of minimize how some of those things come up, but some of them do. Now, let's talk about specifically a couple of shoulder injuries that I've seen. We've seen these in the headlines. I've seen them in high school players. The first one you talked about is like an AC joint sprain. To kind of explain to the people out there, because we've seen some kind of NFL quarterbacks get that, but we've had some guys on our team do that. I've seen other teams. What exactly is an AC joint sprain?
Well, so your shoulder is a very unique joint. The whole shoulder girdle, it basically floats over the top of our ribs. There's only one bony attachment of the shoulder girdle to the rest of the body, and that is your AC joint. Okay, so you can find your AC joint. It's the bony little top part on the top of your shoulder. I often say your true mark of a football player is you have to have a big bump on one side or the other or both. And that's basically you have a tiny little separation. And what it is part of your scapula comes from the backside and meets up with your collarbone. Your collarbone at the end of it joins up with the scapula. And basically those joints are just like your fingers coming together. There's no ball and socket. They're not hooked together, but they are like coming together, and then there's like some tissue, but it's kind of more like one's on top of the other.
Mm-hmm.
And what happens is, say somebody like gets pile drived when they get tackled, the scapula gets pressed down, but that collarbone stays up, and so you get this ping effect. And they call it a piano key sign. We recently just had a quarterback in here that's got a piano key sign. His AC joint, and he rips his shirt off. Our intern saw it the first time and goes, "Oh," like that. I mean, they look pretty nasty, but that little joint is just it's there to add a little bit of stability, right? So even though this kid has sprained his AC joint, basically there's no stability coming from that AC joint anymore. So what we have to do is we have to make sure that the stability comes from the muscles that surround his shoulder. If you've watched our videos before, if you heard us talking about shoulders, we talk about the scapula stability or the shoulder blade stability. Because that joint basically floats over the top of our ribs, it has 17 muscles that attach from the scapula to the rest of the body. And basically, those muscles have to work in coordination to keep that shoulder blade pinned against the ribs, but also be able to move and function so that our arm goes over our head.
Mm-hmm.
The other joint in the shoulder girdle is the actual shoulder joint, or the GH joint, glenohumeral joint, meaning the shoulder blade and the ball and socket. So it's a really small one, but we equate it to looking like a golf ball sitting on a golf tee, right? But a golf ball sitting on a golf tee, it sits, upright like this. We're turning this on its side. So we're relying on muscles and everything to hold that in place, but still allow a ton of rotation and free movement. So
it's very similar to the hip as far as that part of your body goes.
Yes.
So for the AC joint, obviously, kind of when someone gets an injury like that, they're usually impact kind of injuries. Guys falling down. So, I remember I had it when I fell, and as a lineman, you block with your shoulder a lot. And so one of the things that they did is they kind of put like a little donut on there. So you kind of minimized getting that direct hit right in there. And that's kind of like just a pain management thing. But then other than that, you're saying that like for specifically the AC joint, you just do the strengthening of the muscles and around it, right?
Yeah. There's really, so I kind of joke around and like the AC joint is just going to really test how tough you are, because it's going to hurt, and there's not a whole lot you can do outside of the surgery realm to make it not hurt so much. And it's every time you get hit on there, it's going to hurt again, but it's not causing further damage or further injury. It's just sensitive at that point.
Yeah, I've definitely felt that. I remember when I was playing in college, I played left tackle, and I did a lot of down blocks. So my right shoulder had an AC joint, and I was stepping down and striking with my shoulder, and you definitely you felt it. You felt it. I know that. So AC joint is that. And then tell me, let's talk about like the injuries that come around the joint, right? I know you have like labral kind of tears, you have rotator cuffs. Tell me the difference between those and, again, how those function and how those show up. So
we just use the golf ball sitting on a golf tee example, right? So everybody knows of the rotator cuff muscles, right? The 4 rotator cuff. You don't need to know them, but everybody talks about them because they're very commonly injured. So if this is our golf tee and this is our golf ball, the rotator cuff muscles basically from the shoulder or the GH side, they wrap around that joint and they attach onto that shoulder blade, and they act like finger projections that will allow movement, like they'll actually assist in moving, but they basically deepen the socket of that, or hold the GH joint together. Now, what the labrum does, I'm going to use a cup here, but a cup the labrum acts like the suction part of the cup, and it holds that. It like deepens the socket, and it's tissue that goes around that GH joint. It's like tissue right here, goes around that GH joint, deepens the socket. Those rotator cuff muscles kind of bleed in with the labrum and attach to the shoulder blade. So very often you hear of people having labrum injury or a rotator cuff injury. I kind of think they don't exist one or the other. They kind of exist together. Now you might have more of a labrum injury versus more of a rotator cuff injury, but they kind of have to coincide together, and they look a lot alike. The only real way you would know is through MRI. Yeah.
Now I had so when I had my hip surgeries, it was labral tears.
Yep.
And it was basically I was bone on bone in my hips because my labrum through arthritis had worn away. Is
Right.
that the exact same mechanism that the shoulder has?
Yeah, it's very, very similar. So basically, it's just like the hip, the labrum's bigger because it's a more sturdy joint.
Yeah.
In the shoulder, it's just a little smaller because it's got to allow more movement, right? What you'll commonly hear is a slap tear, and that just means superior labrum anterior to posterior. So it just means the top part of your labrum is all torn. It can fold in on itself sometimes, or it can just completely tear off. But yeah, we see a lot of these injuries in our office, actually.
And it seems like where like a direct contact or falling that kind of puts stress on the collar on the shoulder, but the collarbone and stuff is like the AC joint. But like the labral and those kind of rotator cuffs happen when it's out of position, it gets kind of like pulled out or pushed out somehow like that. Is that is that an accurate description of kind of how those things occur?
I think it's more of a overuse or bad positioning of the GH joint, or misfiring of other muscles. So I don't think there's the straw that breaks the camel's back per se, but it's more of a repetitive use or a long-term. You've been going down this road for a while, and it was probably going to happen regardless.
So there's some sort of injury with some sort of mechanism in there that's messed up, and then maybe falling on it or twisting or getting pulled is something that is the last act that ultimately creates that trauma that creates a major injury, right?
Right. And so obviously we want to avoid those, and how do we avoid those? And it's my favorite thing to talk about is the stability of the shoulder blade. So
before you show us this, let me ask you one question, because I know, and I've had guys with shoulder injuries, and of course, all my years playing, I'm sure my shoulders are kind of messed up too. There's usually two options, right? There's usually you have a surgical option, and then you have a kind of a rehabilitation option as like either that will fix it or that be a means to get through the season to get to a surgical option. What are your thoughts on kind of when to know how to use those options when you get told you have some sort of shoulder rotator cuff or labral injury?
So I'll explain it basically with a research paper. There was a research done where they took half of their individuals. Everybody had a rotator cuff tear or a labrum tear of some sort. Half of the people went and actually had it repaired. The other half, they did what they call a sham surgery. They just made the incision marks, but they didn't actually go in and repair. Every one of them, everybody together did prehab, basically rehab before the surgery. They were all put in arm slings for 6 weeks, and then they all did the same rehab protocols. When they followed them a year out, 3 years out, and 5 years out, the people that didn't have the surgery or had the sham surgery had much better outcomes, and significantly better outcomes. And so what that tells us is basically the rehab and the rest of it, and the prehab had more of a dramatic effect than actually getting it surgically repaired.
Interesting.
Yeah. So my advice on this is like we should be doing shoulder rehab pretty much for everybody, and it should be added in basically to our lifting routines. But if you have or have been told you have a rotator cuff injury or a labrum injury, like start rehab right away.
Yeah, try the rehab route first.
Yep.
And plus, I also do know that the people that I know that have had shoulder surgeries, it's a very, very long recovery, because they have to pierce that sac and that has to heal, and it's almost like that those cons of surgery outweigh the that you can prehab or rehab it without having the surgery, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, there's always risk to surgery. We've gotten really good at it in medicine that there's no adverse effects to surgery as often, but there's still risks to surgery. Anytime you cut open the body or anytime you're cutting into tissue, there's tons of scar tissue that come along with that. And I always say scars are like icebergs. You only see the top third.
Mm,
Below that scar is a ton of other things, and so that
mm.
happens also, like what you said, cutting into the actual joint to start working on it. It takes a long time for that process to get fully rehabbed, and it's very tedious.
And the
So
shoulder is probably one of the joints that is complicated enough to where that shows up. Where like a knee, if you tear your
yeah,
ACL, there ain't much you can do. You got to get that fixed, right?
correct.
The shoulder
Yep.
you can get without it.
Yep.
Interesting. Now, can you show us some of the things that guys should be doing, like your prehab kind of stuff? Just some simple stuff that guys can do, after they lift weights or after before practice, just to kind of prevent some of these and or kind of strengthen these things up if you do have some shoulder injuries.
Yeah. So, like I've said before, the best thing that we can do is rehab or gain strength of our shoulder stability muscles, right? So, I got a little diagram back here. Um, what often happens is we're a trap driven society, meaning like our traps, like if you walk around and you just touch anybody on the traps, they're all going to squirm, right?
Yeah.
And that is just because we overuse those traps that attach to our neck to the top part of this shoulder blade right here. Okay. And they get really, really good at what they're doing. But what happens is they just drive the shoulder blade up. And
Mm,
now the muscles that are here, that are down here, that are trying to keep that shoulder blade in perfect harmony, basically just get very weak, not weak, I should say underutilized and
mm,
not as active, right?
mm,
So what we're doing a lot of is shoulder blade activities that are going to start working on these muscles to get stronger. Okay. So if you are doing lifts or things in the weight room and you notice that, like, to be able to do that exercise, curls, for example, if you're doing a curl right here and you notice or you're looking in the mirror and it's like this,
mhm.
right? That shoulder blade is out of position. The muscles that were down here are turned off. They're underactive. And you're just overtraining these muscles. And so the shoulder just gets out of balance, right? So one of the things that we like to use is a band, and we do banded wall walks. So I'm going to turn around here just a second. And what we're going to do is you're going to push your elbows into the wall, and you're just going to walk your hands up and back down, trying to stretch that band as far as we can so that our shoulder blades are being pulled and pinned down, but our shoulder is still moving and we're working, that shoulder blade is still moving along as we're creating tension on it, right? So that's a really good one. Another thing that people often do is they'll put a band around their wrist and like go into a quadruped. So I'm going to kind of move right here. And basically you can go right here. Trying to get, there we go. So you're here. Don't let your spine sag. You're pushing your chest away from the ground, and you'll feel your shoulder blade muscles start to work there. And then all you're going to do is keep one hand planted, reach up 12 o'clock. 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock. And really, the muscles that are working are the one that's supporting. So this arm is working, and these shoulder blade muscles are working really good. So we use that one a lot. Another one that we can use is it's called a Brugger. It's very simple, but basically get your elbows pinned against your side, band out like this. Like you're serving plates, you press outward, keeping those arms there. You come back in, and you're just pressing out. Right now, my shoulder blades are burning right now, and I haven't done a whole lot, right? And so, like, it's obvious I need to work on this a little bit more. But what I'm saying is, like, it doesn't take a whole lot before those muscles that are underutilized will start to tell you, hey, yep, you're right. I need to pay attention to these. So
those are a few exercises that they can do. And that, I mean, right there, it would take less than 5 minutes to do these, like every day before or after practice or weightlifting. Also, another big thing probably is the mobility routine that we've introduced here, that if you can go back, I'll include a link to it in the comments, wherever you're finding this, that, to do that every day creates that movement in there. And then would you say that when people are lifting, I know that you had told me one time that you do twice as many back exercises as you do chest exercises. We feel like we want to push things so much, but we're not doing the pulling part of our exercise routines too. Would that be a good practice?
Yes. If you just walk around high schools, kids are generally like this. I know I am. We do a lot of pressing exercises. We want to double up on the pull exercises, like you were just saying, just to kind of pull us back into this or strengthen those muscles a little bit more. Yeah.
Well, the good news is it sounds like, with the right amount of prehab and rehab, shoulder injuries even can be prevented in a lot of instances. And the ones that aren't can probably be dealt with, without a surgical option and if those kind of routines. And I think that even if you're doing those things, you do get injured, you'll probably heal up faster and get back on the field in a quicker time period, right?
I would agree. Yep. So, and the best thing to do, like before you get a shoulder injury, start doing some of these, because shoulder injuries are not fun. So.
No. So that's a great lesson for all you guys that are watching this, whether you're a parent, a coach, or a player. Just throw these in your routine. Even if you don't have shoulder injuries, don't have shoulder problems. If you're playing football, you're going to be feeling some shoulder kind of discomfort probably. But these things will get you back on track. And even if you do have a little bit of an injury, it'll help you out. So again, Dr. Nolan, thanks a lot. That was some great information in a short period of time. Those for you out there that are listening or watching this, be sure to share this, right? Subscribe to our podcast. Right down there's a subscribe button on our YouTube channel and all the social media at Bober Academy. This is just great information that can really, prevent these injuries and get these guys back on the field. So, Dr. Nolan, thanks for sharing all your knowledge. We really appreciate it. And we will see you next time on the Bober Academy Football Podcast.
Thanks for having me.